Welcome to Own Your Zone podcast, where we feature venture capitalists, innovators, angels, and other investors who create positive impact globally. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hi, I'm JiNan, Glasgow, George. I'm a patent attorney and founder of NeoIP, a law firm that helps clients maximize their return on investment for patent assets. I'm also host of this show, Own Your Zone, where we feature venture capitalists, private equity and angel investors, and key innovators. This episode is brought to you by NeoIP, where we help companies increase their valuation and protect their business through strategic intellectual property protection. At NeoIP, we provide legal services to help companies develop strategic patent portfolios and monetize IP assets. We help innovators impact society for good by transforming ideas into assets and connecting them to resources that they need. Thanks so much. And today I'm so excited to have with me Daniel Doulton, the CEO and co-founder of Solaris Suborbital. Daniel, welcome to our show.
Thank you, JiNan.
It's good to have you on and good to see you again. Well, by way of introduction, Daniel, you have such a track record. It's stellar. Pardon the space pun, but you're a serial entrepreneur, tech and innovation, intellectual property heavy companies. Talk a little bit about your background as an entrepreneur, the capital you've raised, what you've done.
Well, thank you. Well, it really started in way back when I was at university in England at Imperial. We were at the time, a center of excellence for AI as it happened. That was Imperial College. But one of the things that Imperial was very good at was at spinning out new entities. So, from an early age, I think in my career, I already had the groundings of how academia was creating IP and spinning it out into entities at a very early stage. And then successively through that, I had a career then in mobile where we were making mobile devices. So I worked for a company called Psion, which made the first handheld computers, which then went on to become the smartphones that we all use today. And through
Thanks for that.
I worked for two entrepreneurs, founders, who are actually brothers. And on their time and dollar, I learned an enormous amount about what it actually takes to run an entrepreneurial venture. And that was a fascinating organization, Psion and Symbian, because it had so many layers of value, everything from designing the hardware, software, services, etc. And in the good old days, we did everything. There wasn't this, elegance of being able to outsource to speciality. So you really had everything close to you. So you lived and breathed it. And that's when I really understood the power of IP. The brand firstly, but what sat behind the brand in market was some amazing bits of innovation that were not just in the hardware, not just in the software, but in the design, in the total package that we put together. And that's why, as I was saying, that the pride of that was, the Symbian operating system became the operating system for the first generation of smartphones, which I was lucky to build one with Motorola. So that gave me a very good grounding in it. And then from there, a couple of hops and skips trying things. I started another business myself. I got the entrepreneurial itch by then. So I was now hitting my late 20s, early 30s, and I was like, yeah, I've got to go and do something. And, it's great. It's infectious once you're in that culture and that environment. And so I started through with my partner, a complete frustration, trying to solve a product problem, which was voicemail design. You may remember before we had anything but the voice channel on our phones, everything was through voice. And if someone missed a call or you were sat in a meeting, you'd probably have several voicemails to surf through. We do it with email today and text messaging, but in those days, it was ugly. It was painful. The user interface was horrible. Pressing keys to fast forward and delete and trying to then typically scribble down the message when you had a phone, wedged between your shoulder and your ear. So I realized there was a much better way, which was to convert that voicemail into a text message. But what lay behind that was the problem of, well, how do you convert it reliably? And, as I said, at Imperial, that had grounding in AI. Fortunately, at Psion Symbian, I'd seen the best of breed in the market for interfaces using speech recognition or writing, which was powered by the then AI. And I realized there was an important missing element, which was what problem are we actually trying to solve? And I realized that the speech world at the time was asking the wrong question. And my hypothesis was, actually, this is a data problem first and foremost. It's not a speech recognizer problem. That's just a means to an end. The endpoint was data. And actually, when you think about it that way, it's really a search problem. And that's how I started a company called Spinbox, which very successfully figured out how to not only convert voicemails to text, but on the AI side of it, we worked with Cambridge University. We set up a research lab up in Cambridge and Histon, with 16 of the most brilliant minds, two amazing leaders of the AI world at the time, Professor Phil Woodland and Dr. Tony Robinson. They did absolute magic, but their answer to us was, you've given us all the data we need to be able to figure out what the recognizer needs to do, what the whole conversion process is. So we had what they now call today large language models. We now had highly trained systems, and we had a quality control system in there as well. So that was a big step. We were bought. Part of that you probably know today, people will recognize it as the front end of Siri on your iPhone. So when you speak to it, that was certainly our technology after we were acquired. But also in networks. I think T-Mobile here in the US, as an example, still converts voicemails to text. I don't know because I'm not there anymore, but I'm pretty sure it's our technology because we have those deals with 32 telcos.
Speech to text is, the implications of that today, they are really great. But you said something there that strikes me as really important, not just for your past and your history, but going forward. So many businesses today are about the data. Right.
Exactly.
It's about the data that's there. And yet one of the things I'm noticing is a lot of companies don't properly value it or even have enough awareness to think about valuing or monetizing it. Let's transition to your new company, Solaris Suborbital, which is a lot about data, right?
Oh, totally. It is, in fact, I'll start with that. It is a data company, first and foremost. But briefly, what is Solaris Suborbital? So firstly, it's in the name. We're a suborbital platform. And what does that mean? Well, it means we're actually not in orbit like satellites. So satellites go in orbit. They go flying around the world at a heck of a speed, up to 17 to 20,000 miles an hour just to stay in orbit. We sit still. So we sit in the suborbital layer below that. We're actually technically in the stratosphere. But that allows us to sit still and do something very different to what satellites can do. So as satellites fly around at high speed, they can only take an image of the scene as they fly by, and then it can be weeks before they come back and revisit that same place. In contrast, we get to sit still over anywhere you want us to be, and we can what we call sit and stare or gaze down back at Mother Earth, and we source continuous data. So think of it as high definition video, whether that's through a camera, through a thermal sensor for forest fire detection, whether it's detecting greenhouse gases, whether it's looking at natural animal stocks, fish and other migrating animals, you name it. There's a vast array of applications. And the big difference is that we add something that is missing in what we call the data stack. So if you look at where we get Earth data today, we originally started by flying balloons and up around and with people in them and writing notes and sending them back. It's typically for war. I think around the First World War. That aerial advantage became interesting, and as we progressed, we used airplanes, with cameras on. Then we got spy planes, then we got spy satellites, and then we got Earth observation satellites. But the one thing that happened is we raced to space, and we went right through this layer that was sitting right under our noses in the middle of it, which is the layer we're in, the suborbital layer. And it wasn't us who came up with this idea; it was actually NASA way back in the '60s, and the European Space Agency had clearly identified that if you want to look back at Earth, you're better off being in this suborbital layer than you are being in space. For the simple reason that it's you can sit still and stare and generate very high resolution, very high quality data streams, but also it's a lot simpler, it's a lot cheaper, it's a lot easier to do. In fact, and this is why Solaris Suborbital is called Solaris, is you can get there with solar powered planes today. And our planes are like big gliders. And we're totally green in that sense. We use solar power. They're totally autonomous. They fly off like a drone and get to where they need to be. And they stay there for months at a time.
Wow.
So yes, we can do everything satellites can in terms of their vantage point, their stare back at Earth, but with the simplicity and economics of a plane. And that's why it's kind of the best of both worlds.
Yeah, it does seem like you're filling a blind spot in data gathering.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
extraordinary. Wow, that's extraordinary. I imagine it's going to take a while, to get this off the ground, so to speak. But you've been working on it for a while, and you have a great team. Can you talk about your other team members, your co-founder?
Absolutely. So the real star of this story is a chap called Andy Elson. Andy, and I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, is a bit of a legend, kind of the grandfather of the high altitude industry. And he's certainly a legend, and he has all the awards you can imagine. His real career originally was in high altitude ballooning, namely balloons and craft that are designed to go around the world. So they go up into the stratospheric layer where you get calm, steady conditions, where you have no real weather at all. And his experience in that allowed him, when he was then working at a company called Kinetic, to design what we call now the first generation of solar gliders some 20 years ago. In fact, he designed it to go up and take photographs of a high altitude balloon, because he realized that he needed to take pictures of what it was doing, and the only other way was to set up another craft. But he needed something that was controllable and could task around, as we say, at will. It could do what he wanted it to do rather than float around and then disappear. So that program became Zephyr. That aircraft that he designed was called Zephyr. And roll the clock forward, Kinetic sold that to Airbus Defence. And today, Airbus Defence have been operating and flying Zephyr very successfully, setting all sorts of world records. So thanks to Andy, Generation 1's out then. His team then span out a second version of that, which is called the Phaser 35. And the 35 means 35-meter wingspan. That was very quickly bought by Airbus's competitor, British Aerospace Systems in the UK. That too is a military application, so it's flying. We don't know where, because no one's allowed to know what these things do.
Sure.
But we can guess the word Ukraine is a hotspot for activity. But then after that, Andy was then and set up a joint venture with the UK's mapping agency. And together, they had identified a clear not only need but business case for it. They developed a third generation of this solar glider, which was even better. It was slightly bigger. It was far better designed. It was actually a commercial design, not military. Yeah. And what that allowed him to do was to make this thing really easy to operate, really easy to build, really easy to change the instruments on it so that you can change what it does when it's up there. So it's very configurable. It's very easy for us to turn things around and meet anyone's requirements. And critically in all of this, it's also the best flight platform in terms of data gathering. So it has everything you'd want in it. So thanks to Andy's 20 plus year and his team, who are now at Solaris Suborbital, I have to just mention they're with us.
Yeah.
We've got what we think is the most viable platform for serving the rest of the world, not just military, which is being served by two companies, but everyone else, which are the...
You did mention military and obviously defense applications. So Solaris is doing commercial. You're just focused on the commercial space, right?
We're focusing on commercial, yeah. And in fact, we have a very strict, clear set of values. We're focusing really on serving data to our planet stewards.
Yes.
People who are out there trying to protect and trying to improve the way we relate and live on this planet. So it's a very broad church. We're passionate about giving them the ground truth that they need so that they can understand very complex systems, whether it's meteorology, ocean science, land science, etc., through to protecting our most precious resources like, forest fires, which we know are a terror right now and only getting worse, climate change, weather disasters, and then right through to helping, protect critical infrastructure, whether it's, our power lines, whether it's transport ways, whether it's, seaways, and then it's protecting things at sea. Very large areas of the world's seas are, largely unseen, and that's where, unfortunately, a lot of the damage and illicit activity is taking place today. So again, we're a perfect fit for giving those agencies, those frontline, people, the ground truths they need now. So we kind of say we're the last minute in knowing something. There are people who talk about in telecoms last mile.
Yeah.
Well, last minute.
I love that. So we'll let Elon Musk have Mars then, and we'll
you can race off there.
But We'll take the stratosphere. How about that?
Yeah, we're worried about looking after our only home, which is Earth right now.
Thanks
Yeah,
for doing
that's
that.
our priority.
On behalf of all humanity, we appreciate you and what you're doing. Thanks so much, Daniel. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening in aerospace. Given your background, I just want to understand, who are you, admiring or regarding highly right now? It is kind of a race to space. Who should we keep our eyes on? Who are you looking at?
Gosh, that's a great question. I think the easy ones are obviously SpaceX, but I think they've got an unfair advantage. And but what I think is even harder is they've taken a very much a sort of infrastructure view. We're providing launch and getting people up there. What I think is fascinating are all of the other innovations that are now building around that new launch capability into space. And the little that I know, because obviously I focus looking back at Earth, not looking out to the outer edges of our universe. There are some players, for instance, and Declared Card, a very good friend of mine, Simon Waterfall, is starting a business called Allocation Space. And it's actually building the infrastructure for storage and this is really interesting, and for cleaning up the space debris that's up in the satellite and those layers where we operate, not us, but where generally people operate.
Yeah.
It's a really bold mission to do that. And these are people who have not been in the space world their whole career. So they're stepping, 5 rows across from where they are into a completely new vertical, but they've got such a brilliant vision and they've got, such commitment to the endpoint that I absolutely clap them through and laud them for, pioneering and trying. And as we know, this is typically where the most successful innovations come from. They come from outside, typically, the industry. Mm-hmm. And so likewise, I was in Los Angeles last weekend at this great event, this VC event, which was around space. And again, there I saw some brilliant companies like Cesium Astro, who are developing, and it might sound very trite, but the communications capability, taking 5G from Earth, but getting it to work in space and ultimately on the moon, to be able to make sure that we've got consistent communications capability for everyone, not just the lucky astronauts who have their own dedicated systems. So there's so many things in there. There are people who are looking to do manufacturing in space because we get lower cost, higher quality products, lower impact. Who would have thought the idea of putting a factory in space was something we consider in our lifetime? But it's happening. So yeah, those are the ones I'm fascinated by, about what else we can do in space that's actually going to help us back here on Earth.
Right.
Yeah.
Being able to provide food supplies and, the reusability. Yeah. I do appreciate your comment, though, on SpaceX and the infrastructure to be able to reuse craft is making it affordable and manageable to launch the payloads, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So that's fantastic. We'll keep our eyes on that. And speaking of eyes, let's talk about AIs, right? AI, if you will. There's so much happening now with AI. Since you are a data company and AI does need to be fed all of the data, what are your thoughts on AI? There's so much, of course, focus on merely ChatGPT, which has its place, but generative AI is a fascinating thing. And then combining that with new data sets like the one Solaris Suborbital will be generating. What are you looking forward to with AI? What do you see in the future there?
Oh, well, I'm like a kid in a candy shop with the data we're going to get in AI, because obviously I have a background in it. And that's how I fell into this category originally, was realizing this is all about data and that machine learning capabilities are the engine for really advancing humanity's understanding of complex systems. So let me unpack that. That's a lot of big words. So when we look back at Earth and we look at very large areas, we may only be looking at, say, I'm going to pick a symbol, say forest fires, and detecting them in the early stages. Yeah. But the interesting question is, well, what's the impact that has, say, on something over in Europe, say the quality of soil over the next 5 years in Europe? I'm not sure there's a correlation, but let's just ask that question. What does it do? Well, it may be a very tortuous path between that, the way it affected weather, because forest fires emit an enormous amount of carbon dioxide and particulates into the atmosphere, which travel around the world, and they do have an impact on local weather systems somewhere else. But being able to connect all those dots over very vast data sets is where AI wins hands down over humans.
Yes.
So the one thing that AI does at its heart is it's amazingly capable at finding the relationships between cause and effect in very complex data sets. And that's where it wins against humans. Humans are typically good at roughly 7 variables or so. I think that's the theory. AI just eats that up for breakfast and can look at thousands of variables together and find very subtle but meaningful correlations between them. So in our world, when we source lots of data and we aggregate it, so we don't just look at our data, we look at satellite data, we look at ground data and anything else.
Yes.
The job is to put that whole thing together and try and help us, I'm saying us grandiosely, our planet stewards, the scientists and the first responders really understand what's important and what's the next best thing to do? How do we best reduce forest fires, or how do we best protect fishery stocks? And it's going to be in the data. There's no question about it. The whole planet is one big system, and that's I think
Yes.
finally everyone's beginning to realize, Gaia is one thing. It isn't separate little countries with borders. We are one big living organism. And that's what's so essential about this, that, as we put the data together, we need to understand the relationships, very subtle but very powerful relationships between, literally, a butterfly flaps its wing over here, it can cause a storm somewhere else. And that's what we're seeing playing out as well today in climate change. So, that gets me so excited, because it's an endless unraveling of the beauty of nature, but the power of nature, and how we can learn to, live with it and actually respect it.
Yeah, live with it for sure, and improve the situation for people. Absolutely.
Yeah, we have to.
We got what excites you. Is there anything about AI that scares you?
The misconceptions and the belief. So let me give you an example. The current generation of big AI models, things like ChatGPT and Bard, etc., they're what's called large language models. Mm-hmm. And what we've got to a point now of demonstrating is that actually, with enough data, like I did at Spinbox, you can generate incredibly good outcomes based on a question, which from a language perspective look very credible. The fundamental problem is that it doesn't really have reasoning. What it's doing is ingesting anything that's been said out there by anybody, and it doesn't have what we humans have, which is a very, fundamental common sense to really sense check and rationalize that and go, wait a second, does this stack up? Or where did that information, the fundamental piece of data that you're basing the next 10 pages on, where did that come from? Is it reliable? Is it, was it from somebody who just made stuff up and blogged a lot about it and became high value content simply because it's got a lot of viewers on it?
Yes.
So in a simple example is that there's enough content out there to convince people we live on a flat earth, right? So AI generally will just take that into its statistical model and say, well, that's a volume of content out there that I might bias my answer on. So that's the first part, is that humans at this stage are dangerously getting into the idea that this is intelligence. And that's the piece that most bothers me about artificial intelligence, is that we've got to be really careful. And it was a terrible piece of branding back in the 50s and 60s that it was intelligence. Yeah. It wasn't. The closest is it's a simulation or a simulacrum of a specific thing human brain does.
Yeah.
So I think that's the danger, is that we as a society suddenly jump on it and assume it's the panacea for so many things. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people in society, children as a good example,
yes,
who aren't yet adult enough to really rationalize and understand, am I getting something that's real or not? How do I go and test that out? And then, of course, there are people in society who also, may not understand the subject that they're getting answers on that. They may look up something medical, and maybe one of these systems generates stuff that is not actually good advice, simply because it's been biased, or they don't understand the human in front of them, what they're about. So that's the danger, is that we're jumping way too fast to conclusions.
Yeah.
But let me just caveat, I still think it's an incredible piece of progression, as a piece of technology for humanity. So, I laud it and want it to be successful, but I think we've got to, we've all got to take a step back and think a little more, groundedly about what's it really about.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And there's so much in the naming that causes our preconceptions. And now, of course, we know the smart grid for the electric power grid is not smart at all. The utility still needs us to call and say the power's out, and smart cities are, long into the future, but it's a step in the right direction for sure. Well, this is amazing. I think I could talk to you for a few days in a row to continue the conversation, but we're so glad to have you. You are owning your zone, this stratosphere in which you are operating in, and we appreciate you sharing that with us today. How can people find you online if they wanted to reach out to you, Daniel?
Easy. I mean, we've obviously got a website, solaris-suborbital.space. How about that?
Perfect.
So go there, or just drop me an email. My initials DD at solaris-suborbital.space.
Okay.
And any other means too. So through you as well, because I know you're a big fan of ours. So thank you, JiNan.
Fantastic. What a pleasure to have you on, Daniel. Thank you.
My pleasure. Bye now.
Thank you for listening to the Own Your Zone podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.